Good afternoon, and Ophelia, it is absolutely wonderful to be able to speak to you about the Workshop Center for Open Education and the time you spent there. Um, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, Bruce, it's wonderful to be speaking with you and to have a recollection about all these wonderful years that we spent uh, under the influence of Lillian Weber and her workshop center and the work that we did. So it's great. So let me tell you a little bit about how I met Lillian and
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
role that she played in my life. And some of this might be myth and not um, really reality, but this is the way that I recollect it. So um, I started teaching a long time ago in 1971 in what was a school without walls. It was an experimental school that we had in what was really then Hell's Kitchen. And of course, Lillian Weber was a presence in that school. She visited often. She actually spoke to me about teaching many times and spoke to the group of educators there. Um, and so I knew Lillian as a force that shaped actually that school that had nothing to do with the workshop center. It was a school that cropped up in the city. It was not uh, I think a product of this 1960s.
Mhm.
Uh, Directed or coordinated, I would say, by a New York University graduate who I think was a follower of open education and Lillian. And he often brought Lillian around to see what we were doing, right? So, I mean, I knew of Lillian that way, and I was very young then, and just looking up to Lillian. And I must say that I had a very traditional education, right? I mean, I was an immigrant. I came at the age of 11. I had got a scholarship to a Catholic high school of all things. And so it was a very traditional high school education. And then went to Hunter College, where I was, trained as a teacher, but in a very traditional kind of way. So Lillian opened up a whole way of thinking for me, along, I would say, with my colleagues who were much more advanced than I was. I don't even know how they hired me. I think they knew they needed a Latina teacher, and I was there. And at that time, most of my students were Puerto Ricans and Spanish speaking.
Mhm.
So, so that was that. And I want to say that Lillian had maybe an impact, a direct impact on the way that I started teaching them, because I remember Lillian coming into my classroom, which were not classrooms, because at that point we had gotten a grant and we actually moved out of the public school building, PS 17, because there was a lot of conflict between that traditional structure and what we were doing. And we rented space. And Lillian came into my pod, I would say, where I was teaching. And she said to me something that I've never forgotten. She said to me, wait, so these students don't speak English? No, they don't speak English. You speak Spanish? Yes. And she said to me, have you ever thought about using Spanish and teaching them? And I thought that that was anathema. That's not what they had taught me to do, right? They had taught me to teach in English, and this was it. And the kids were going to get it because you're supposed to immerse them in English and that. So, I always, when I think back, I always credit Lillian with cracking that also. Ricardo and I both sometimes talk about uh, Lillian's image of the crack. I'm sure you've heard it a billion times of this system is full of cracks.
Right.
Don't complain, just find the cracks and go through it.
Mhm.
So I always think, well, it was Lillian that first cracked this monolingual context in which I was supposed to teach that didn't work. So, fast forward to 1980. By that time, I had continued my studies. I did my master's at Hunter College, and then someone said to me, "You have to get a PhD." What is that? They brought me to the Graduate Center, and I started working on my doctorate. And I finished, and then it was time to find a job. And by the way, I substitute teaching, and I did work during non-academic times
Mhm.
in at the school, all through this experimental school that I'm talking about, all through my while I was getting my doctorate. And okay, and then I thought, all right, well, it was complicated. I in 1976, it was, the city's breakdown, and I was fired.
Right, the budget cuts,
The
which
budget
really
cuts,
hurt
yeah.
the
So
workshop
anyway,
center.
yeah, so 1981 came around, and I saw an ad for a position at City College. And it was a position in the bilingual education program. Now, it turns out my doctorate was not in bilingual education because there wasn't such a doctorate at that time anyway. And I thought, well, I shouldn't apply there. But then that was what was in my blood almost, right? Bilingual education. So I thought, well, I'll apply. And Lillian was on the hiring committee, along with Ricardo, my husband, who was the chair of the hiring committee. And of course, he was my husband then. But Lillian encouraged me to apply. Lillian said to me, well, I said to Lillian, I don't know the theory. I mean, I haven't really studied theory. And she said to me, well, you know how to do it. And people don't know how to do it. So anyway, so that's the story of how I was hired at City College. I was hired at City College because Lillian Weber and Miriam Dorn wanted to give me a job, and Ricardo didn't want to give me a job because he wanted to diversify the department or the program, and he saw right away that I was too much like him, and that was not good for the department. So they hired me on, what was then soft money on a project, and I worked for the first 2 years on the project, and then eventually, we were able to negotiate a tenure track position.
Mhm.
And you asked about the involvement at the workshop center. Um, so my involvement, again, in the beginning, was led through Gerardo Torres, basically. Gerardo Torres was my good colleague
Mhm.
in the program, in the bilingual education program. And Gerardo taught me a lot because one of the problems that I always had, and I think I've had this from the beginning, is trying to reconcile my academic stuff
Mhm.
that's up here with with life and the way that I relate to things. Um, and it's the teaching and the practice has always been very important to me, but I had always separated it from the theoretical part. And I think something that Lillian taught me and Gerardo taught me also was that the practice was theoretical and that's where I needed to start in
Mhm.
order to build theory. Um, so, uh, so I remember walking into the workshop center the first time. First of all, as you know, Bruce, well, I was hired when we still were at Clapper, where there was so
Clapper. Huh.
Clapper Hall. So there was no space as the workshop center became afterwards. And I think it was once we moved to NAC and that workshop center also became a physical space that that somehow this was the uniting all of the pieces, right? Because at Clapper, Lillian did her thing, but it wasn't visible, right? Uh, at NAC, it was very visible, right?
Mm.
And one of the things that I think I learned very fast from her is how much learning takes place when you immerse yourself in an activity, right? Again, how do you educate teachers to appreciate the value of play? I remember that as one of my first lessons that I learned in that space in
Mm-hmm.
4220, I think it was, right?
4220, right.
Or 220, right? And I remember her leading an activity in which we played with balls. And here you are in a university, right? And you start thinking, okay, what are we doing playing with balls?
Hmm.
Then you reflect on the experience that you've had, and you realize there is so much that you learn from being involved in the activity, right? That you don't even understand if you read about it. You have to physically be involved in order to understand it. And I remember also her involvement with plants and how important the plants were to her, and how she would watch them grow, and how she would make us curious about them. She would ask us, what are the questions that you have about the plants? And I remember in the beginning, I used to think, all right, what am I supposed to say about the plants,
Hmm.
But the idea that she was always encouraging us to raise questions about the world were
Hmm.
important. Cooking was the other thing, that was also an activity that she engaged the teachers in doing. And again, it complemented and took over so much of the teachers' understandings. And the idea that the world was messy, right? And that it was in that messiness that you learned, right? That it wasn't the arts here and music here and everything else here, and then these sequences there, which were more academic, but that everything was integrated, right? So I learned that at the workshop center. I think I told you the other day when we first met again, that I also learned to be the type of academic I am because of Lillian. Because again, when you go through a PhD, a traditional PhD program, you are programmed yourself into thinking that the only way you could be an academic is if you cite the literature, if you're good at those things. And I remember the first piece that I wrote, maybe my second piece, but and I gave to Lillian to read, and she came back about a week later, and she sat down in my office, and she said, "I want to talk to you about this." I said, "Okay, Lillian," and she said, so what my question is, because she was very direct, very generous, but very direct, always honest. And she said to me, where are you in this piece? And I was taken aback because I thought that the only way to write academically is to write without you, right?
Hmm.
Without just writing sort of objectively, what I saw as objectively back then, right? Which was not me. Me was not included in that reality that was supposed to be validated. And I've always remember and when I finish a piece, I always ask myself, so where am I in the piece, right?
The piece, yeah.
Um, And so what I want to say is that this experience at the workshop center was so foundational to how I became the type of academic I am. I don't think I could be this type of academic without the constant reminder of Lillian that the world was messier and more complex and more interrelated, and that you had to make the connections yourself, that things weren't separate at all. Um, and I think one of I left City College in 1997.
Hmm.
To me, my years at City College were foundational. I always say I learned everything there. I learned not only from Lillian, but from the students. They were was a wonderful generative place, as you know, and it was a place where you never stood still. There was always something going on that generated activity and thinking and creativity. But I went on without any experience because I think, again, I don't know, to become a dean of a school of education. And I had no idea what I was doing. No idea what I was doing. Um, and I mean, I remember doing two things. One is I went to see someone by the name of Vito Perón that you might know,
Yeah.
who used to run the North Dakota Study Group.
Hmm.
Um, that Lillian introduced me to. I mean, we went to those meetings because of Lillian. I want to mention Miriam Dorn also, because I think that they were there were a pair that I think pushed me in different kinds of ways, but they did push me. And I asked him, all right, what do I need to do? Because I don't know what I'm doing. And the other thing was always sort of at the end of the day saying, well, okay, I have this problem. What would Lillian Weber do? Because I knew that Lillian Weber would have first an optimistic reply,
Hmm.
and second, this message that she always gave us that um, you just have to find the crack in the system. The system is full of cracks. Find the crack and go
Like
through it.
facts.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, so you must remember her saying that. So to me, that was the influence of Lillian, and I have never forgotten it. Whenever I've had to surround myself by people um, who think differently, I think, well, who are the Lillian Weber Club? I worked after Vito, I worked with Cecilia Troll also, who has the tradition that you have also.
Mhm.
And those are all people that respect Lillian, understand her work, and that completely always opened up spaces for my thinking and who I was. So that's what I can tell you about my relationship to both Lillian and the workshop center.
It's so rich, and thanks for that. When I was listening, as I was listening, I'm thinking about Lillian's always focusing on the possibilities.
Yes, right,
What were the possibilities that children bring, that teachers bring, that thinking people bring to this?
right. And the strengths, right? I mean, that was the other model that the School of Education had back then was building on the strength of children.
Building
Remember?
on the strengths of children. Yeah.
That has always again been also one of my guiding principles. How do you find the strengths? And because there is potential there are possibilities there,
Yeah.
build on that rather than ignore it. Yeah.
And so building on the strengths of children and of us grown-up children, the teachers that we work with, um, how do we, here we are with the college and the dean of the School of Education, who Edwin Lamboy, who's been a wonderful support and who is committed to reestablishing the workshop center at City College. He calls it the Workshop Center 2.0.
Uh-huh.
And so how do we build on these strengths
Uh-huh.
in this world,
Huh.
which is very different from what Lillian built on
Absolutely.
in the
Yeah.
1970s?
Well, and as you remember, of course, the work that Hubert Diazzi did
Hmm.
was not exactly what Lillian did, right? And the space was there, but the space was being utilized in a different way. So, I think that one of the things is you have to find a visionary, but also a visionary that is, there are a lot of visionaries out there, but you have to find someone who's going to have the personality to push for things that are even more difficult, I think, today than it was back in Lillian's time, right? Uh, but many of the issues have shifted. I mean, of course, technology is a big one, right? You have to now have a workshop center that not only includes plants and bowls and stoves and all kitchens, but also technology in some creative kind of way, right? Uh, and then you have to find also a diverse group of people to work there. I think one of the things, and I say this because I've been involved in progressive education from the very beginning, and one of the things that I think people like Cecilia Troy is doing well now is precisely bringing to the progressive education minds issues of race and language that were never addressed because the world was different and I think the concerns were different. So you have to be able to deal with that. And then I think you have to have young people involved, people who see the value of this. And there's enough resistance right now among teachers
Hmm.
um, who believe that reading is not just the science of reading, who believe in creativity, in literacy, in science, etc. So I would say to to start something or to do something, yes, you can build it on a legacy, but you also have to transform it and let it evolve on its own. My experience has always been you move out, the new person moves in, and the new person brings in their own dreams and their own issues and whatever. So you have to let it emerge in whatever ways those persons are going to be able to lead. But you also have to fill it with diverse people, generationally diverse also,
Hmm.
so that they can take it into the next era, which I think needs to be done. I mean, one of the things about progressive education is that it's always seen as something from the past, right?
Yeah.
What aspects of it, what did we learn, and what aspects of it can be promoted into the future to, again, to disrupt these tendencies that close up the spaces for imagination and for
Yeah.
possibilities. Yeah, yeah,
And bringing in the real world, like you talked about early on, about
right.
that the real world keeps intruding on us, and we have to connect our teaching to
Mm-hmm.
what the real world is all about.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I think you also have to have a space.
Hmm.
No, I have more and more understood that space is also an important fact in the way in which you move your body, in the way in which you imagine the world to be.
Hmm.
Um, so, I mean, a classroom, one person isn't going to do it. A classroom isn't going to do it, right? You have to think of structuring something that is innovative, um, space-wise, material-wise, artifact-wise, right? So that it comes together and that it's visible, right? Because a center that is not visible um, that is doing something different, like the workshop center did, and that you would do in the future, has to be seen by the naked eye. and, and there is so much in education that is just immaterial, right? Something that is physical, that when it only exists in ideas, people don't see it. So it has to be visible. To
Has to
me,
be
that's,
visible.
yeah,
And I remember Geraldo Torres,
yeah, yeah.
when he used to set up his class in the workshop center, and
Right,
he would have a bowl
right.
in the middle of the table.
Uh,
Everyone was sitting around it, and he had all of these fruits in the bowl,
uh-huh.
and it just started a conversation
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
about where the fruits came from and what we did with them, and all the history that's involved in something that is as tangible as the fruit.
Right, 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 right. And I think that's the other thing. It has to be interdisciplinary, right? Because again, we break up things into disciplines in such small pieces, and as you say, the world is related, right? So the fruits have a history, have a culture, have a uh,
Have a
and
language.
yeah, right. That's right. And so much is involved in them. Yeah. Mm, yeah. So it's not an easy task, but what you cannot do is reproduce the past, right? The past is gone
Past is gone.
and it has to have the spirit of the possibilities, of the imagination, of the interdisciplinarity, of the space that is generative. It has to have that spirit,
Mhm.
but it can't be the same. It has to be something different. So it's going to be hard, not easy.
It's a big challenge, but I think that when we look at people who are struggling with programmed learning, for instance, in the schools today, they're looking for a way to bring humanity, the
Right,
humanness of learning,
right,
the immediacy, the inventiveness, and so on into their classroom.
right,
And
right,
that's what the
right,
workshop center did for me.
right, right, right. Um, yeah, and the fact that, when I visit classrooms now, I'm so astounded at the sterility sometimes of it's not even because there are visuals everywhere, but they're being used in a very mechanical kind of way, right? And I think the interactionality of the workshop center was important. The idea that we were interacting when I walked in and Lillian engaged me in one of her activities, I was not Professor Garcia. I was learning, and she was learning from what I was telling her. It was interactional in a very horizontal kind of way.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. A space that you can trust, where you can trust to be yourself and not to have to impress anybody or, I think that's important. So,
I have a former student teacher who I met with about 3 weeks ago, and she is teaching first grade in a school in the west side of Manhattan. And what she said she wanted that was important for her was to bring together new teachers who could talk about the experiences that they were having so that they could bring up the questions that would be different from the questions that more experienced teachers have. I mean, I think that that's part of the role that I want to see the Workshop Center 2.0 also being
right.
engaged in.
Yeah, no, it would be great because usually what we're seeing in schools is that a lot of the curriculum is being mandated and there is no room for questioning it or for, negotiating it. I'm not as revolutionary as Lillian was.
Mhm.
I love the cracks always, but always you negotiate the reality, right? Like I always tell the teachers, okay, you can't change the policies that the schools are throwing down on you. You can't change them.
Mhm.
You don't have to follow everything. You can negotiate them through your intelligence, through the children themselves that
To the
disrupt it.
children themselves, yeah.
So, yeah, so a space for that type of questioning is also for that type of inquiry is would be also important. Yeah. Yeah.
So making that space for people to come together and talk about their experiences, talk about the children that they're getting to know. I mean, I would. tell when I was a director of a school, I would tell the teachers, you may end up having to use the textbook, but don't let the textbook get in the way of your getting to know your children,
Right,
and
right.
then modify what you're doing based on what you're learning from
That's,
them.
that's right. I know. And teachers get all frustrated because, for example, the science of reading. And, I always say, well, okay. So you do this for 10 minutes and then you do what's significant for the next half hour, and that's it.
Right.
How to negotiate these policies that are being handed down that have nothing to do with the children or the families or the communities, but have been externally imposed without considering who it is that you're teaching. I think that that's important. And then I think, this idea of the teacher and the children is also very important because that's a symbiotic relationship that often is not brought together, right?
Mhm.
I mean, we speak about what the teachers need and what the children need as if it's not a symbiotic relationship. And I always I think that, yeah, you have to start with the children and the community in which you're teaching and the classroom, and then yourself. And then what is it that you can do to get to know the children better
Mhm.
and to act with them rather than just for them as if they didn't have any agency. So all of that is a space for that negotiation, I think, is important.
I
And
like that idea. Space for negotiation and recognizing that not just children need to have agency, but teachers need to have agency.
yeah, 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 no, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Remember going to the workshop center and learning about myself as a learner.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And that was so important to me
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
because Lillian would say, if you're going to run a class and you're going to use materials, you have to have the experience of using materials yourself.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
you have to be appreciative of the learning that you're doing while you're making things
Right, 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 right,
in a social context because we look at other people and see what they're making, and we share what we're making and we ask our questions.
right, right. And that's so different from what teachers are experiencing these days when they're handed down a packaged curriculum and they're told this is what you have to teach this day and that day. And they know it doesn't work. Uh, but I think many times, there has been a separation sometimes between what we teach them in teacher education, at the university level.
Mhm.
We're all thinkers, we're thinking ahead, and their realities, which are very, very different, right? I mean, and I see so much sometimes with new teachers who are so disillusioned because they leave teaching schools of education full of hope and and then they go in and they're told this is what you have to do. And, in 3 years they're out because they can't cope with the oppression of being told exactly what to do when. And I think that is what they need. They need some sort of link between the a world of possibilities, the future of possibilities, and where they are today. I take a lot of refuge on Miles Horton idea of you can't, you have to keep one eye in on where you are. I don't know if it was one eye or one foot, but I can't remember. And the other one or in where you want people to be, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think that is a lesson that sometimes we forget, right? Because we're so anxious to get teachers to do what we know works,
Mhm.
and yet they're in situations where they cannot do it. So, how do you get them to become conscious of this, to take a stance first,
Mhm.
and move slowly through steps that are going to open up spaces? Um, that doesn't happen all of a sudden. It takes a lot. Yeah.
One of the things that was so important to me was that the workshop center taught me to trust myself.
Hmm.
And I think that when we push new teachers and our students who are becoming teachers to do things in a certain way, we might in fact be undermining their trust in themselves.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yes, because I mean, I'm always amazed at what teachers are told that they need to do because I say I would never be able to do it. I
Mm,
mean, all of these standards and how you forget it. It doesn't work that way because life is not linear in any kind of way, right?
mm,
And children's lives especially are not linear, right? And things happen in schools all the time because school is a real complex of lives together that are constantly in motion, right?
yeah.
And how do you describe and how do you capture these lives in motion, which is what you're doing when you're teaching, it's you keep the motion going. Yeah. Yeah.
And keep opening up the cracks.
Uh-huh, yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah, we've quoted Lillian a lot with that. Actually, I think Ricardo and I just finished an article in which we end by saying something about Lillian Weber and talking about the cracks because it's a lesson that we have never ever forgotten, and it's so important. Yeah.
Yeah. And keeping your eye on where we are, but also on where we want to go.
You want to go? Yep.
And we want
Yep.
to go.
Yep.
So I want to thank you for taking this time.
Okay, Bruce. Well, good luck to you. I think that's so. I am very happy that Edwin Lamboy is supporting this endeavor, and I wish you luck. And if there's any help that you need from an old, retired, non-energetic person, but who really has her heart on this work, let me know.
Sometimes it helps to make us more energetic when we remember what it was like
That's right.
and
That's right.
and the
That's
camaraderie that we developed.
that's right.
So
That's right.
again, Ophelia, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce.